Okay, good morning. Should we get started now?
Yes.
Here we are. I'm Karen Place, your Saturday Matters hostess. And this is especially meaningful to me to bring Laureen and to tell her remarkable story. You just have to read this book if you haven't. Because I remember when I was just about the age Anne Frank was when she was writing her diary, I was reading it, what an impact it had on me. And it is so wonderful to hear a story that started out in the very same neighborhood and ended much better for Laureen than it did for Anne Frank. She's going to tell us about that. Laureen has some photos, and I have some excerpts from her book to read. How would you like me to start? Would you like me to begin with the reading, or do you have some introductory things you would like to say?
Anyway, there has been some controversy about what kind of a book this is. It is a memoir. It is a biography. And one of my friends said, you know what it is? It's a love story. So I think it's all three of them, and you have to look at it as a braid, three strands, and they are interwoven all the time. But I'll start with the preface. In 1992, the exhibition Anne Frank in the World came to Portland, Oregon, where my husband and I had made our home for 30 years. The exhibition was a major event. Some 24 people in the greater Portland area who had lived through the Holocaust were willing to speak about their experiences. They told their stories and answered questions, bringing 72,000 visitors, closer to what had happened in Europe during the Nazi regime half a century earlier, and I was one of those witnesses. In 1936, my parents emigrated with their 3 daughters from Frankfurt, in Germany, to Amsterdam. We declined.
Push the arrow.
Here we are. Okay. These are the 3 of us. You may guess which one is me.
No. Push it one more time.
Oh. Okay. Now?
Yes. Whatever you see on your screen, you'll see up there.
Oh, okay. Thank you. This is my big boy, Ralph. He'll come in the story at some point. We declined settled in the same neighborhood as Anne Frank's family, whom we had known in Frankfurt. Margot Frank, Anne's older sister, was among the first 4,000 Jewish refugees aged 16 to 40, ordered to report for forced labor in Germany. My older sister was served the same summons. Anne had just turned 13, I was almost 15, and my younger sister just 12. All 3 of us were too young under the edict to be sent away. It's well known from Anne's diary that the day after Margot received her summons, the Frank family went into hiding in the back quarters of Otto Frank's business. They managed to hold on for 25 months thanks to the loving care of Mr. Frank's clerical staff and to the unwavering support of his business partners, and wrote vividly about their secret life above the office and warehouse rooms. Sadly, Otto Frank was the only one of the family to survive. Anne and Margot died from typhus in Bergen-Belsen, and Mrs. Frank succumbed to exhaustion in Auschwitz. Upon his return to Amsterdam, despite his tremendous loss, Mr. Frank was happy to find that his business partners and his office staff had survived the horrors, and that my family still lived in the same apartment where he had last visited us 3 years earlier. How had we escaped the dance of death, he asked at the time, a question repeated again and again whenever I speak about the Holocaust. There were other good Germans, besides Oskar Schindler with his now famous lists. Thanks to one of them, a little-known lawyer named Hans Kallmeyer, my family and thousands of other Jews survived. As one who benefited from Kalmayer's courage, I've long felt the urge to write his story in English. So this book is his story. That wasn't always set out, at least. Hans Kalmayer saved the lives of more Jews than Schindler. Among many others, my family and I owe Kalmayer a great and unpayable debt. Without him, we wouldn't be here. I fervently hope that this book, which blends my family story with his, will help to bring him the international recognition that he deserves. So that is the introduction. And now we can look at some pictures. This is the three of us just before we left for the Netherlands. This is still in Frankfurt, I'm pretty sure. This is my mom. And this is my dad. And this is Hans Kalmayer as a young boy. Okay, let's stop here for just the pictures.
I can move in, or you can lean into it.
We'll work it out as we go along.
Okay.
And oh, by the way, before I go on, I tend to speak fast. I cannot get rid of my accent. I know it's a nuisance. I tried very hard, but I haven't been able to. But I can slow down if I go too fast. So at any time, just say slower, and I don't mind. And I don't mind. Okay, because I tend to get carried away. All right, I would like to first talk a little bit about Kalmayer. He was the youngest of three boys. His father was a judge, born in Osnabrück. We'll get back to Osnabrück later. Osnabrück is a city in northern Germany, exactly halfway between Amsterdam and Berlin, to give you an idea where you would find it on the map if you are interested. His two older brothers served in the German army during World War I and were killed in action within 1 month in 1917. So he was the only one that was left over, which made him not an enthusiastic military person. He was very much a pacifist and very much against anything military, which endeared him to me. His father was appointed a judge in what is now Poland, but was at the time part of Germany. So Hans grew up seeing a minority run a majority, and he saw that the Poles were deemed less of valuable people than the Germans were. The Germans, the Russians ran the place, and he took exception to that even as a child. He felt this was unfair. And he credited his dad as a judge that he wanted to learn Polish so that he actually could understand the people that were put in front of him when he had to adjudicate cases. Anyway, so his childhood was, Hans Kalmayer's childhood was overshadowed by the death of his two brothers, and then of course the loss of World War I. The family went back to Osnabrück, and Hans went to school there, at least for a while. And later on, following his father's wish, he studied law at many different German universities. That was the usual thing. You didn't just go to one school and get your degree. You went to several schools, listened to several professors, several persuasions, and that's what he did. And eventually he got his law degree in 1930. No, 1930, I was 3 years old. A little younger than on this picture. Anyway, let's switch now to my story. My family left Frankfurt in 1936 when I was 8. And my older sister was almost 12. My younger sister was just shy of 6. And we children adapted very fast to life in Holland. We loved it. because there was a great sense of freedom. With your bicycle, you could go anywhere. You didn't have to ask anybody to just go. People were very child-oriented. In contrast with Germany, I think that's something you might appreciate. If a German child was nasty to another child, and the mother would come to talk to the mother, and the mothers would be extremely apologetically. Thought, oh, I'm so sorry she did that, or I'm so sorry that he misbehaved. Not the Dutch mothers. They stood by their children and they said, oh, well, my daughter is not usually aggressive. If she's aggressive, there must have been something before that time. So parents defended their children, and I thought that was marvelous. I hadn't seen it then. The Dutch are very child-centered and maybe even indulgent, I don't know. Anyway, I loved life in Holland, as Anne Frank did, by the way. So life was good for us. We learned Dutch. One side track of being refugee children is that the children adapt much faster than the parents. And so we learned Dutch much faster than our parents. In fact, we felt a little bit embarrassed by the poor Dutch of our parents. And so whenever there was something that needed to be discussed, we, my older sister and I, were always part of the discussion because we knew the language, and we told our parents, you can't say that, you must phrase it that way and this way. So being a refugee kid has a democratizing influence, really, which I cherish. Well, in 1938, there were many refugee families in our neighborhood, Amsterdam South. This part was called the River Quarter because all of the streets were named for rivers. And so that's the River Quarter. Around the corner in the same block, on the one side was the Montessori school to which Anne Frank went. And on the other side, around the corner, was a new drugstore. And the person who moved in there was a pharmacist from Frankfurt, whom my parents knew, just like they knew the Franks. And their only son was Rudy, who was at that time in 1938, he was 16, and I was 11. And so very soon we became very fast friends. The details are in the book, but I cannot give you all the details because I would be talking till midnight, and there will be a little more than you are bargaining for. Rudi and my older sister and his friend Rolf and I spent a lovely camping vacation, 1940, out in the countryside. Americans have often wondered how it come that my mother, father and mother, allowed us to go camping with two boys and didn't feel that it was awkward or dangerous or what have you. But my mother had been, as a child in Vienna, had been a member of the Wandervögel, which was a German organization totally opposed to Victorian primness, out into nature and walk and hike and have a good time together. So it was taken for granted that we wouldn't misbehave, and of course we didn't. But the freedom to be out in nature was something that was actually affirmed in my family. I think you remember that. So we had a wonderful vacation, biking all over the place on the field, which is an area that later on was the place where Rudi was hiding when he had to go into hiding. But it all started in 1940. So let's just say that life till 1940 in the Netherlands was good for us, but particularly for the children. My father has a difficult time making a living, but he did. And then, of course, came the occupation of the Netherlands. Within a few days, the Dutch military surrendered, and we had German occupation. And the Germans first said that they were not going to do anything against the regular life in the Netherlands, but pretty soon they started with their ugly anti-Jewish laws. We couldn't go to regular school anymore, as that happened already before in Germany. We were gradually marginalized out of public parks, cinemas, theaters, opera. We couldn't do anything culturally, and we could not do anything that was recreational. The beaches, everything was forbidden for us. So that was very limiting, very ugly, very nasty. Still, things got only bad in 1941, when we already had to leave our regular schools, and when all the Jews had to register. Everybody who was Jewish had to register and to write down how many Jewish grandparents they had, because according to the German race laws, the number of Jewish grandparents were decisive for your Jewish race. Now, how was a Jewish grandparent defined?
Is that my cue to read this part? This part about the Jewish registration?
Yeah, go ahead, please. The light is poor. Can you?
You got that?
Okay, I'll try it this way. In January 1941, Reich Kommissar Seyss-Inquart had issued Decree 6/41, requiring all Jews in the Netherlands to register with their municipal offices. Article 4 defined who were to be irrefutably considered Jews. Number 1, Jews are all persons whose grandparents included 3 or more full Jews by race. See 3 below. We'll go on. Number 2, persons with only 2 fully Jewish grandparents are deemed to be Jews if they either A, belong to the Jewish religious community on May 9th, 1940, or subsequently joined it. B, or were married to a Jew on May 9, 1940, or after that date. And this is number 3, a grandparent is deemed a full Jew if she or he was at any time a member of a Jewish religious congregation. And then Kellmeyer had some objections to that.
Okay, well, he's not the opposite. We will get there. Okay, of course, you notice the absurdity. If somebody is a member of the Jewish congregation, that doesn't make him or her Jewish by blood, which is what the Germans were after, by race. It was a total inconsistency. And now I have to focus on Kellmeyer again. Kellmeyer never became a member of the National Socialist Party. In fact, he was actually barred from the bar in Osnabrück because he had defended communists and he had a Jewish secretary. So he was a no-no for the Nazis. But he eventually had to serve because war was declared. And so he became a member of a air control warning system. And in that capacity, he was sent to the Netherlands right after the Germans conquered and occupied the Netherlands. And he couldn't get out of uniform fast enough because he just hated the whole military thing. This reverberates. Is it bothering you or are you okay? Okay, good. And so he had an Osnabrück lawyer friend who was a member of the Nazi Party, but not out of conviction, but out of convenience, out of just to be able to function. And that man had a rather important function at the headquarters of the German occupying government in The Hague, Mr. Studer. And Mr. Studer found a job for Kellmeyer, and the job was that he, Kellmeyer, as a lawyer, as a well-known good lawyer, would adjudicate any case where a Jewish petitioner would claim that he or she should not be considered Jewish because there was something wrong in the paperwork or illegitimate grandfather had been discovered, or whatever other reason there was or could be invented. And Karl Mayr consistently, if the story was good and there was substantiating evidence, would adjudicate in favor of the applicants. And that's exactly what happened in my family. Let me see where I can find it. This is Karl Mayr with his wife. Karl Mayr as a student first, and then Karl Mayr with his wife.
Push, yeah.
No, this is my non-Jewish grandmother, who was absolutely and guaranteed non-Jewish. She was an Austrian woman and from a large Catholic family. She had been a professional singer, and later on there will be a picture of her and her four, three sisters singing a quartet. They were a cappella singers. And anyway, my grandmother was singing with her sisters in Frankfurt in the 1890s, and she was befriended by a Jewish merchant, Mr. Blumenthal, and eventually they wanted to get married and have a family, but the mother of Mr. Blumenthal did not want him to marry a non-Jew. So don't you ever think that intolerance only comes from the outside towards the Jews. Jews can also be very intolerant. So their grandmother actually forbade her son on penalty of being booted out of the family and losing his inheritance if he married that non-Jewish woman. So my grandparents were expecting by that time my mother, and they did not get married till the mother of my grandfather died in 1919. So my mother was born out of wedlock and raised in a Protestant foster family because my grandmother was too proud to be entertained by this her spouse, and she kept singing till my mother was 13 years of age. And so my mother did not have an easy childhood, believe me. But it was our salvation because my grandmother had not been married till 1919, and although Mr. Blumenthal then said that Marianne was his daughter, that was just a kindness, to legitimize her, or so it could be phrased. It was the truth, but it could be seen that way. So Karl Mayr felt this was a good case for adjudicating in favor of the petitioner. And,
Yeah, I think this is a part where you
Yeah.
went, okay. Hans Kallmeyer was charged with interpreting the registration law, and you'll see why all this became relevant, in the Netherlands, and with settling any doubts as to whether a person was an Aryan, a full Jew, or a part Jew. In his new position, Kallmeyer had considerable autonomy. Lives hung in the balance of his decisions. He soon found ways to use his legal skills in the service of his humane convictions. He argued that individuals should have the right to refute the assumptions that a grandparent was racially Jewish if he or she was a member of a Jewish religious congregation. His reasoning was so persuasive that 3 days later, Rijkskommissar Seyss-Inquart adopted Kallmeyer's argument. Seyss-Inquart's decision gave Kallmeyer the necessary discretion to allow petitioners to substantiate their contention with sworn testimonies or solemn declarations before Dutch administration officials who were usually cooperative. If a petitioner claimed that he or she was not and had never been a member of the Jewish community, a district court judge would summon the secretary of the congregation to refute that claim. Generally, the person summoned would not appear in court. Consequently, the petitioner's claim went unchallenged and hence was accepted by the judge. The discretion Kallmeyer created for his petitioners resulted in more than 5,600 cases of doubtful ancestry his office had to adjudicate. In addition, Kallmeyer permitted petitioners to substantiate their requests with attestations by racial specialists of their own choosing, whereas in the German Reich, determinations in similar cases were based on findings by experts working for the Reich Office for Genealogical Research, or the Reichsschippenamt. Excuse me, I butchered it. Even with her help. Kallmeyer's office also accepted testimonies from Jewish persons, which were not admissible within Germany. Kallmeyer made another decision in favor of the petitioners in doubtful cases. In Germany, the claimant had to prove without reasonable doubt that an unknown ancestor was an Aryan. In the Netherlands, Kallmeyer's office had to establish whether the undocumented forebear was in fact Jewish. Equally helpful and of far-reaching consequence was Kallmeyer's resolve to deal with the religion of children from mixed marriages according to Dutch law, which held that minors could not decide their religious affiliation. Hence, his office would not categorize the offspring of newly designated mixed marriages as J2, i.e. half-Jewish Jews, who would eventually have to wear the yellow star and be subject to deportation. Instead, children of those mixed marriages were routinely categorized as G1, or mixed blood and non-Jews, which meant they did not have to wear the star and would not be sent to a concentration camp. This makes Franz Kafka sound like he's pure realism, doesn't it? Ostensibly, the Office for the Decision of Dubious Cases regarding the extraction according to Decree 6/41 sought to guarantee full rights to every pure-blooded Aryan. Its covert purpose was to return as many Jews as possible to the general Dutch population. Those Aryanized by Kallmeyer's office could resume previously forbidden positions and activities as if they had never been registered as Jews. This whittled down the count of Hitler's Jewish victims. Because of the way Decree 6/41 was written, there was no appeal to the decisions Kallmeyer's office handed down.
So, my family received the life-saving decision of our Aryanization petition from the Reichskommissar on January 21st of 1943. It was printed on official stationery, but that isn't all that important. I won't read that. Because later on, after I have, maybe I should prove the document. Here's Kallmeyer as a soldier in the middle. That's what you get if you weave two stories together. They get very much mixed up.
We're moving into
This is the official paper that shows that my mother and my sisters and I are no longer considered Jews. Okay, let's stay with that paper. Okay, my family received the life-saving decision on our Aryanization petition from the Reichskommissariat on January 21st, 1943. It was printed on official stationery with the German eagle, as you can see, and the swastika and all the hoopla. That document was not signed by Hans Kallmeyer, but by Dr. Gerhard Wander. You can see it says Wander underneath. And it turned out that actually he didn't have the right to sign it, but he was even much more active anti-Nazi than Kallmeyer was, and he got impatient. He just wanted to save as many people as he could. And he had to be dismissed eventually because he was too rash. Kallmeyer was very thoughtful, very careful, very methodical. So later on, when I did research, I read a report that Kallmeyer wrote on our case, and that is what it says. That as of March 1942, the Dutch District Court in Amsterdam had established that my mother was not the natural child of Mr. Boonshaar, which you already know by now. And on July 16 of that year, the same court had satisfied itself that neither my mother nor my sisters or I had ever been members of the Jewish congregation, which wasn't true, but never mind. Okay. The fact that the petitioner was born out of wedlock to an Aryan mother justified the presumption that her procreator was Aryan as well. That's what he just jumped to the conclusion. There were no indications suggesting that she was sired by a Jew. Consequently, the petitioner was not subject to the registration order, and her 3 children were to be recategorized as of mixed blood grade 1. Her marriage to our Jewish father was to be considered henceforth a privileged mixed marriage. So that was the official verbiage. All right, so we were off the hook. My sisters and I could go back to regular schools, which was particularly good for my older sister because she was a senior in high school. I was a 10th grader. And I changed high schools. I went to a more mathematically and natural science oriented high school because Margot Frank had gone to this school. This was a girls' school. And by the time, I'm speaking of 1943, I was 15, going on 16. I was so annoyed with the boys in my class. They were such awfully childish creatures. And I had my big boyfriend, of course, that I decided to go to a girls' school would be the better thing to do. Maybe I would eventually turn into a lady after all, which I wasn't. I was a tomboy, but so I went to a girls' school. And amazingly, I was accepted right away. There were more half-Jewish girls in the class. There were also 2 Nazi girls. They were ostracized. They were sort of, nobody liked them, you know. They were hardly condoned in the class. So anyway, the change back to a regular school was anything but traumatic. It was really joyful. All right. Now, of course, Woody, my boyfriend,
Here's the love story part.
was not as fortunate. He did not have any non-Jewish forebears. His best friend Rolf, the one who had gone camping with us, was among a group of Jewish young men who were picked up as early as 1941 and deported way before the systematic deportation started in July of 1942. And Rudy went immediately into hiding. In fact, he finished his final examination for the School of Ship Engineers while he was already in hiding. And then when he had done his orals, he disappeared. And he disappeared to the same area where we had been camping in the summer of 1940. He knew some of the peasants there, and eventually that's where he hid out for the first year. Let's see that I can find. Oh no, this is already running. Okay. Then it became unsafe for him to stay out in the field in the wooded area of the Netherlands because there was a Nazi police chief, and so it was not safe anymore. And he found a hiding place near Amsterdam, in Amstelveen, just outside Amsterdam, and was hiding there for a year, excuse me.
For how long?
1 year. Oh.
And then he got absolutely stir crazy. Being a young person locked up like Anne Frank was locked up is really very, very demoralizing. So he prevailed upon his hiding father to get him in touch with the underground and see whether he could do something more active than just hiding. And just walked out. He was furnished with papers. That's the next. So this is a very real-looking paper, but it was all falsified because his name was not Johannes Martinus Edel, his name was Laureen Nussbaum. And under this false alias. He had papers that allowed him to travel in German army trains, and he went all the way to the Pyrenees trying to get into Spain, and found out that the passeur who was supposed to help him across was nowhere to be found. There had been a raid, and there was no way that he could get across the Pyrenees, and he would have been absolutely foolish to go on his own, because although he spoke some school French, it was not a local patois that people spoke there, so it would have been impossible. So he decided to fill out another set of papers and return to the Netherlands. And when he came to the border, that is what
Yes.
you're going to
Okay,
get.
here's my part, okay. In his eagerness to return, he decided to take the direct route from Paris via Brussels rather than the more easterly detour via Maastricht, which he'd used on his way south. That turned out to be a serious mistake. Later, he shared his ordeal in an interview, and here's Rudy. When I came to the Belgian-Dutch border, I was made to leave the train and taken to the border police at the station. I tried to impress the officer on duty by voicing loud indignation. What were they thinking, taking me off the train when I had an all-important meeting the next day in Hamburg, where the Navy needed crucial spare parts for their submarines? My ranting distracted the officer from closely checking my papers, and he actually apologized for the inconvenience. I asked him how I could acquire the special permit that was apparently missing without having to return all the way to my, quote, home office in Paris. He helpfully suggested that I should go to the Oberkommandeur der Wehrmacht. I guess I made...
The High Command of the Wehrmacht.
Oberkommandeur der Wehrmacht, the High Command of the Army in Brussels, just half an hour from the border. On the train back to Brussels, I chased two Belgian Hitler youths out of the train compartment reserved for the German military and their civil servants. I felt compelled to do that. My strength was that I could use the Nazi bark quite convincingly. It is impossible to describe how I felt. On the one hand, I knew full well who I really was. On the other, I had to slip into a totally different role. It was a matter of life or death. I was, of course, deeply conflicted about how to proceed, but decided eventually to go to the High Command of the German Army in Brussels to apply for the missing special permit needed to cross the border back into the Netherlands. The officer in charge told me to come back in an hour because my request and my papers had to be checked. That was the most dramatic hour of my entire life. While walking through this beautiful park in Brussels, there were these two inner voices. One said, "You are crazy, this is bound to go wrong." The other voice replied, "What better choice do you have to offer?" When I arrived back at the government building, the situation got even more dramatic. What did I see in front of it? One of the infamous green vans of the German riot squads. I thought it was waiting there for me. I went in and asked the officer, "Do you have my papers? Do you have my permit?" The man behind the desk got up and said, "Just a moment." He disappeared into another room. Was he getting the green police? Agonizing minutes passed, during which I had to keep a straight face. Finally, he returned with a friendly smile and said, "Everything is all right. Here are your documents. Heil Hitler." I had an authentic special permit to cross the border issued by the Wehrmacht. The original plan, and this is, and that's the end of Rudy's testimony, and I'm going on with Laureen's narrative here. The original plan had been for Rudy to make his way from Spain to Portugal and on to England, where he wanted to enlist with the Dutch army in exile in order to join the Allied war effort and help liberate the continent. A little more than a week after he left, a neighbor called me to her phone. We were no longer allowed to have one. When I heard Rudy's voice, I wondered how he could call me from Spain. But he was at Amsterdam Central Station, greatly relieved that he had escaped with his life. I was immensely grateful that he had returned unharmed and noticeably steeled by what he termed his passage through hell. On the other hand, I had been looking forward to being just a 16-year-old schoolgirl for a while. Standing on tiptoe to keep up with my 21-year-old boyfriend had been exhilarating, but also very demanding. I needed time to mature and did not feel ready yet to enter a lasting commitment. But thinking of our friends, relatives, and former neighbors in the camps, I realized how lucky I was, and we continued to make the best of our difficult situation.
Thank you. All right. Well, we can't do it all. Time is running out. So let me just talk very briefly about the hunger winter, because after the landing in Normandy of the Allied forces, there was very quick progress through France and Belgium, and even the southern part of the Netherlands were liberated all in September of 1944. But we at the West Coast and the Northwest were not liberated. We were cut off from electricity, we were cut off from anything that we could heat our apartments with, and we were cut off from food supply, and we were actually starving. And it was really very, very difficult to stay alive. We ate tulip bulbs, which taste horrible and bitter and yuck. We ate fodder beets like the pigs did, which they were sweet and dirty. I went twice on a rickety bicycle all the way back to the Failure, where we had had this wonderful vacation in 1940, and where Rudy had been hiding, where I knew a few people, to see whether I couldn't exchange clothing, children's clothing, and tableware and all kinds of things for food. And I brought some food home, but it didn't last very long, but it helped a little bit. I was always, my sister was the oldest girl, and I was always the oldest boy in the family, so anything had to be done that required muscles and determination. It was always my part to do it, and I did it as well as I could. Well, now we get to the end of the story in some ways, because finally, in the spring of 1945, we were liberated too by the Canadians, by the way. You know, to sing the Canadian national anthem, which I can still sing and still know the words. It was over. And my goodness, were we ever relieved. But, and I'll read a little bit from the book here. The first weeks after the delirium of liberation were very difficult. Friends and acquaintances who had survived in hiding surfaced, pale, famished, and impoverished. Often a family member was missing, a child here, a wife there, who had been found, arrested, deported, and murdered by the Nazis. Those who emerged from hiding had only the worn clothing on their backs. Most of them were utterly dependent on support from others, often from relatives overseas. In early June 1945, the first concentration camp survivors arrived by train in Amsterdam. Among them was Rudy's cousin, returned from Terezin. Ilse was a young woman of 21 and the only survivor of her family. She was so traumatized that we soon learned not to ask her any questions about the camp and about her parents. Otto Funk returned. Soviet troops had liberated him from Auschwitz and nursed him back to health. Mrs. Frank had died of exhaustion at Auschwitz, but the fate of the daughters was still unknown. Otto told us about the harrowing events he and his family had endured, and there's more about Otto Frank there. Eventually, Otto and Rudi went to the Amsterdam Central Station daily with pictures of Rudi's mother and of Otto's two daughters, as few people came straggling back from the camps asking, "Did you see these girls? Did you see this woman?" And they did this daily for a while. It turned out that of the almost 110,000 Jewish people deported from the Netherlands, 5,000 came back, less than 5%. And the Frank girls were not among them. They died of typhus in Belgium. And so did Rudi's mother, who was originally on the list of liberated people. And he was overjoyed that his mother would come back. He was the only child, and they were very close. But she died after liberation because the British, in contrast with the Russians, did not know how to feed those starving people. They gave them pea rations and killed them because their system was so dilapidated that they couldn't possibly handle the food. So Rudi's mother did not come back. Now let's see.
How about you use the rest of the time by showing some more of those photos
Okay.
and telling what they are?
Let's see. Okay. Well, this is another paper. I think this one is the original one that he really got. The one that he got in Brussels at the upper command of the military in Brussels. And this is another one that he used. And now we get to Karl Mayr. I must tell you that Karl Mayr was imprisoned in the Netherlands after the war because he was part of the occupying forces. And although practically everybody from his office absconded to Germany before the Allied forces took over, Karl Mayr stayed because he felt he had never been a Nazi. He had done his best. He actually got all the documents from all the different German departments and handed them to the Canadians. He felt that he had nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of. But the Dutch were full of vengeance and imprisoned him for almost a year and a half. And he took it in rather good humor. Maybe if I can quickly find it, I can read it. I can't quickly find it. It's important because I'll come back to it at the very end of the book.
I have here marked some.
Oh yeah, for a Dutch patriot, it may be hard to conceive that a German, although he stands in the strongest opposition to the regime of his country, will not easily decide to sabotage his government's measures during a time of war. It requires a moral law much more compelling than solidarity with his country to turn his criticism into actual sabotage. I want to emphasize that subsequently a decent person should not pride himself on this act of sabotage. If he considers them necessary, if he considers them necessary and morally justified. Therefore, do not demand from me that for my justification I enumerate what, when, and to what extent and how I sabotaged the anti-Jewish laws that I undertook and what I undertook against the occupying forces, and perhaps even why I did not go into hiding. That was part of his defense, and he was eventually let go. He returned to Osnabrück. He settled as a lawyer, and he was hoping to be helpful in the democratization of Germany, but it took about 20 years before that happened. Many of the guilty people stayed in power, particularly in the judiciary, and it's too long for me to go into that, but he felt very discouraged, almost to the point of being demoralized, and he withdrew more and more and almost lived like a recluse at the end of his life. And maybe you want to read he died rather young, I think,
And
yeah.
would you like me to read the part that was spoken at his memorial?
Yeah.
This one.
He died at the age of 72, ready to go, because he felt he couldn't do anything useful anymore, more or less. And his neighbor boy, who was his friend all through the war, and the only person in Osnabrück, besides his wife, who knew about what he had done in the war. He never bragged about it, he never spoke about it. He didn't think there was a thing to do. But this one person knew, because he was his closest friend, and that's what the closest friend says as a memorial.
His friend Eberhard Westerkamp is speaking at Kallmeyer's memorial. Our friend Hans Kallmeyer's intelligent mind and warm heart, always quietly wide open for his fellow beings, whether close by or far away, were early on filled with the decisive strength of a wise person ready to extend himself in any circumstance. In the unchanged personality of Hans after World War II, his acquaintances, including those who felt real friendship for him, recognized the familiar eccentric. He still seemed to go his own special ways, or not go them. In any case, went about life somehow differently from how they themselves did. Unnoticeable to everyone except his wife, the black events of the past accompanied him, as if they had become his own shadow. In the end, nothing mattered to him anymore but that which could bring a glimmer of light into the gloom.
But and on something positive, so you can go home cheerfully. Let's put this picture.
There's the love story part.
Yeah, so this is Uli and I getting married in 1947, and the person behind the door is Otto Frank. He was Uli's best man. He was at the Edo Ballet. This is in 1947 in Amsterdam. And then, of course, just one more baby. This is the family in Portland, Uli and Tom. On my left side is Ralph, our oldest son, who deserves a little story of himself because he suffered through our traveling as a postdoc in physics. Uli traveled a lot, and he went to school in Holland, in England, in the United States, and in Switzerland, changing languages 3 times from Dutch to English to French, and he did it all. And he's still there. So he deserves a compliment, I think. Okay, I think we leave it at that, and since it's only 3 more minutes, I guess most of you will have to keep your questions to yourself and ask me whenever you see me in the halls of this building. And there's no Laureen around to run with the microphone.
Yes, and what a story. And here are the books.
Please stand. Burning question I would answer. You still have 2 minutes.
Well, come on up and purchase a book.
Oh, yeah, that's coming.
Cash your checks. Sorry that somehow or other the Square credit card reader has gone walkabout somewhere.
But yeah. Okay. I do have change. If people have done it all bills, I have changed it. The book in the store costs $16.95. I sell it here for $15 because it makes life much worse.
Let's get this out of the way here.
Oh, yeah. He was a physicist, he was a friend of a physicist at UW, and I was a postdoc at UW.